times over the course of a few weeks. If we're further ahead, you need to let me know, or else we're going to go over some stuff again. Jesus, we picked up some parables from Jesus, and then Jesus hops in a boat, calms the storm, right? He gets to the other side, and then the man that's possessed falls at Jesus' feet and meets him. I think that's what we talked about. I remember talking about being scared if I was one of the disciples and a naked man come running, screaming, yelling at me. I don't know that I would have reacted the way that they did. It wouldn't have been a hold your ground type of situation. It would have been I'm peeking out from inside the boat to see what ended up happening. But I think verse 9 is where we ended up, that this man has now come and he has fallen at the feet of Jesus, and he cries out with a loud voice. Well, in Jesus, actually, it says once this man falls down at his feet, or gets there maybe, Jesus says, and it feels like Jesus is the one who initiates the interaction, at least the verbal interaction, says, "Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit." And it says, and because he said that, and then the man cried out with a loud voice, "What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee, I beg thee, I pray, don't torment me." And then in verse 9, so this is where we are at. Jesus has now engaged this man who is clearly in need of healing. This guy has been chained up. He's been living in the cemetery. He has cut himself with rocks. He has lived naked. Nobody wants anything to do with him. And based on the fact that even when he's controlled by devils, the devils don't want anything to do with people anyway, either. And so the guy's living isolated. People have given up on him, and I don't know what was going on in his own mind, but he is definitely in a helpless state, and now he finds himself with Jesus. And Jesus asks the man, after he says, "Come out of the man," then he says, and he asked him, "What's your name?" And he answered, saying, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And then verse 10 lets us know that he continued to beg or to ask that Jesus wouldn't send them into another country. Don't send us far. There's something about when devils feel comfortable around you. They felt comfortable in this area, and they were like, "Yeah, it's one thing. If you don't want me in this guy, that's fine, but we kind of like this environment. They made room for us out here. They tolerated us out here. So if you can, don't send us somewhere where we won't be tolerated." But I do want to point something out here, something that at least for me, this is a personal belief of mine that I express, that when Jesus asks for the name, I think he was speaking to the man. I do not believe that Jesus was trying to engage these devils. I don't think he was trying, because there is no other point when he would cast out devils. He would just say, "Get out." He would just say, "Leave," whatever. They would do their thing, and but there was never a point in when he interacted other than to say, "Be quiet." That's really the only time that he ever and it's not even attempted to interact or dialogue with it. In fact, it's to silence. I don't want you to have voice. I don't want you to speak. I don't think, and the reason I go here is because a lot of people will take this as sort of a pattern or like a method that they want to bring to the table when it comes to trying to work with people that are either possessed or they think that they're dealing with the spirit, and they can get so caught up in trying to identify what it is or trying to communicate with, and I think you're getting off the boat. I think you've missed something in this case. And so I don't think that Jesus is trying to interact with him. I do think that he is trying to speak with the man, but is being interrupted. And he says, "We are legion, for there's a lot of us here." The other thing that we really don't know about this guy, we know how he was treated, and we don't know how long he has had this affliction. We don't know how long he's been possessed. We know that at the end of the story, Jesus says, "Go home and be with your friends and your family." So the idea that Jesus would say, go with your friend, lets us maybe think that he maybe wasn't too far removed, or this hasn't been an affliction that's been like from birth. This isn't an affliction that he's had for such a long time that, he's definitely been cut off from his family, but there's still some familiarity there with his family. But we don't know how or why he was possessed. And I think the valuable part of that is it doesn't matter. I think there's a lot of different ways that people get messed up with a lot of different things, and the why or the how that people get into what they get into doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that we can get them in front of a God who can do something about it. And it's just one of those things, and I don't know why I'm dragging into this. I don't know why I feel this, but there's often so much time and energy consumed with some past information that Jesus doesn't spend a lot of time worrying about somebody's past. There's not very many times where he sits down and he was like, well, I would love to, but let's talk about how you got into this and how we can keep from doing it again. There was never any of that kind of stuff. And even when they brought people to Jesus and said, hey, look, here's a problem, Jesus didn't. The closest that we have is when Jesus finds himself in front of the woman who he says, you've had 4 husbands before, and the one you're with now isn't yours. That's the closest that we get to Jesus really. And it wasn't even as a condemnation. It was just more of a statement of, hey, listen, I know who you are. I know where you've come from. We don't have to rehash it, and we don't need to talk about why they all failed or why you are where you are. Let's just talk about from right here moving forward. And I think it's important that we didn't linger on that fact here. I think it's important that wasn't a part of this story, that Mark wasn't trying to say, so if you ever run up against somebody who's down on their luck, who's an outsider, who's been an outcast, who's had a rough past, that you really got to sort out their past before you can help them into their future. No, what you do is you introduce them to Jesus, and you let Jesus do what he's going to do. Because we're going to see here in just a moment what he does. So we don't know all of the past, but they say we are legion, which legion is a military term. It's rank, file, order to this. This man was possessed, arguably, with an army of evil spirits. And as they ask him, don't send us out of the country, what they do say is they say, in fact, here's a herd of swine. Here's a bunch of pigs over here. Let us go over there. And Jesus gives them permission. Okay. And so they leave him. They leave this man. And it says, and then, and I've heard it said before that these pigs had more sense than some people do. The unclean spirits went out, entered into the swine. We're in verse 13. And all of them, the whole herd, ran violently down into a steep place into the sea and drowned. And of course, we've already seen it, but yet it's another picture of the destructive nature of possession and the devil. But the herdsmen, those that were watching, that saw all of this happen, I think they witnessed the interaction with Jesus. I don't know how far away I don't think they needed to hear the conversation. They saw Jesus dealing with a man that they knew. They dealt with him before. They knew what that guy was of. And then all of a sudden, their animals start going a little and take off, and they put 2 and 2 together, and they then run into the city, and they begin to tell what had just happened. You'll never believe what just happened. And what did they share? What did they say? You know that guy that we've had problems with? You know that guy that we've tried to bind? You know that guy out there that we have chained him up and he keeps causing problems? You know that guy that we hear wailing? 2 cities over, they all get woken up by chickens and roosters in the morning, and we get woke up by the wailings of a possessed man. You know that guy? That's not what they did. They walk in and they said, you know those swine, we just lost them. All 2,000 of those pigs just committed suicide. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry, actually. That's. They come in sharing how those 2,000 pigs just died, and they were not concerned. There was no mention of the fact that the man had been delivered. And when the people from the town come out, it says that they came to see what happened. In verse 15, they come to Jesus and they see him sitting with that guy that had a devil, and that guy is in his right mind. He's wearing clothes. And they were afraid. This man stands actually as a testimony of what Jesus can do, even for those that everybody else writes off. Too far gone, too much happened, there's too much water under that bridge. But he's an example of that. And so when these people come out, though, and they see it, they see the impossible sitting in front of them. I can only imagine the scene, and we don't know the time frame of this, like how long did it take him to get clothes and them to share the story. I don't know how long this takes, but the picture that they come to is Jesus talking with this man in his right mind, and off in the background, the backdrop, is 2,000 pigs in the water getting washed up onto the shore. And they take in this whole thing. They take in this whole picture, and they get afraid. And they reject. And they reject Jesus. And what we then have is in this story, and I don't know, again, I don't know that it's an accidental thing. Maybe this was an intentional thing by Mark, but now we have a prime example of the different kind of soils that Jesus taught about in the previous chapter. Same seed was planted here. There's deliverance, and it falls, and what grew in them? Fear and rejection grew. Fear, and it choked out any kind of faith that they could have. And we have this picture. We have this picture of a healing of the miraculous, and yet what they did with it. And so, again, this fear coming after a miracle, just like with the disciples when the storm was calmed. And I think sometimes when things happen that we don't understand, we can become afraid. And I think I'll take it even a step farther to say, if we misunderstand a miracle, if we misunderstand the why of a miracle, we're kind of left to assume, and sometimes we assume the worst. And in fact, what happens next, it's actually rather shocking. And in verse 17, they begin to pray to him that he would leave. It's such an incredible thing, I think, to read this or hear this for the first time. Like, I don't understand how the deliverance, that picture meant nothing to anybody. And they said, you know what, buddy, I think you've done enough. I think you need to go. They began to pray him to depart. They pleaded, they begged, just leave. And this really, it is seemingly the first rejection of Jesus by non-religious leaders, or by somebody not a religious leader. This is the first time that Jesus had been rejected by the common man. Because up to this point, it seems like everywhere he's gone, and people flock to him for the healings, and they flock to him for the miracles, and they flock to him for the teaching, and the ones that were rejecting were the religious leaders. This is the first time that that's not been the case. And I think at least for me, it's amazing to think, and I know we don't, at least that I know of, I don't think we have any pig farmers in the house, but how easy it is sometimes to allow pigs, and when I say pigs, you can put anything in that box, how we can replace anything to become more valuable or more important than a person. It's not hard for that kind of a thing to happen. It's not hard. You know, you think about, I think about the times where, you know, I got to be careful because I don't want to have to eat some of these words. I remember in my youth, a couple of the early, I never had a bad, severe one, but a couple of the early accidents in my vehicle. The concern was always more about me than about the vehicle. You know, and I know that that's not always the case, you know, or at home you drop that glass and a glass breaks or a plate breaks or whatever. And it's so amazing how that glass or that thing can be elevated somehow in value and importance over the person. And we can berate a person and we can yell at and we can get angry, right? And there's how easy it is for stuff to get elevated into a place of importance over people. And that's exactly what happened. These people, they could not see the value in the man who was delivered. They could not see. In fact, they didn't speak about him at all. They didn't regard him at all. They bypassed that entirely, and all they could see were the pigs. And I think, again, how many times have you found or have you heard, have you talked to somebody, you bring them and you introduce them to Jesus, and it seems like all they can do is mourn over the things that they've lost to the neglect of the things that they have to gain. They say, you mean if I come to Jesus, I have to give up this? Or you mean if I come to Jesus, I can't do that? And you mean if I come to Jesus, I can't? And they get so wrapped up in the things that are seemingly to be lost. And I don't know what it is, folks. I don't know what it is. But how easy we can find ourselves mourning access to sin. The things that we have to leave in order to follow Jesus. But yet that is the case so often for so many. In fact, just to have those conversations where somebody look at you and say, you know, I can't do what I want to do and be a part of the church. To look at a situation, to look at something and say, you know what, I can't have. Which the crazy part about this is they shouldn't have been messing with pigs in the first place. Pigs were considered an unclean animal. They shouldn't have had a heart of those swine anyways. And yet they mourned that. And say, no, you're upsetting something here that I don't want to be upset. And it really is truly mind-boggling to read and to witness this kind of thing, how the townspeople preferred the company of a possessed man and their pigs to Jesus. And it's amazing for me, because again, I have seen so many people trade Jesus for the things that they wanted right now. I want this, and I feel like I need this in my life, and so, sorry. Nothing against you, Pastor. And people over and over and over again trade Jesus for something else, and then years later they'll look back, you look and it is an incredible reality still, to me anyways, that people will astonishingly choose some things over Jesus in their life. People will choose familiarity of life over Jesus. People will choose what they know or what they want over the newness that Jesus offers. And I don't understand it, folks. I don't understand it. And it's obviously it's not new. I mean, we're reading about it in a book that's thousands of years old. It's not a new story. It's not a new story to tell. It just, the pigs are different and the people are different, but it's the same story. And so whether it's intentional or not, Mark has established for his readers the lack of saving power and miracles. I mean, that's a big one. But yet, even though they had such a miraculous event that happened right in front of them, it did nothing to sway their heart towards Jesus. And I want to be of the opinion, and I think a thing through as far as I can, and so far I'm here, but I want to be of the opinion that while miracles don't save, I think that miracles, they do quickly bring people to a point of decision about Jesus. I think it's one thing for somebody to come in and they hear teaching and they hear singing and whatever, they can experience it in small and low doses, and they can sort of drag out a decision to follow Jesus. They can drag it out because they haven't been brought to a point of decision yet. But when a miracle gets dropped right in your face and it gets dropped right in you, I got to do something with this right now. I have to. I've never seen this kind of a thing. We have tried everything and it did nothing work, but now here is a miracle and I've got to do something. And I think when miracles, they do that for people. And so I think that's part of the power. That's part of the weight of it. You get somebody in the house and a miracle happens. Now I've got to do something. I either have to lean in or I have to walk away. But I can't do nothing with it. I can't just pretend that it didn't happen. I've got to do something with a miracle. And the townsfolk, they chose to walk away. They prayed. In fact, it's pretty sad. Their prayers mirrored the prayer of the devils. I'd rather you not be working here. Why are you pestering us? Why are you bothering us? And Jesus answered their prayer too. Because their prayer was, leave us alone. And so he answered their prayer. What an incredible missed opportunity for that community. And you wonder how many people missed a miracle because they just refused to let Jesus in that day. But at that point, Jesus, in his answering of their prayer, he turns around, he makes his way back to the boat, and the man follows. He comes to Jesus and says, let me come with you. Clearly, nobody wants me here. Clearly, they were happy when I was not a part of their society, when I was not a part of what was going on in their world, and now that you are a part of my world, they didn't want you there. They don't want anything. So just let me come with you. It'd be so much easier. And Jesus, to my knowledge, this is the first and only time where Jesus says, no, you can't follow me. He didn't say you cannot be a follower of me, but you can't follow me. And so this is a deviation from the standard operating procedure of Jesus. Jesus usually tells people, keep quiet and don't say anything. If he healed somebody of leprosy, don't tell anybody, just go show yourself to the priest. And the devils, don't tell anybody, keep your mouth shut and just go your way. And he told everybody, don't say anything except for this guy. And I think there's something here, and I admittedly I don't know what it is. I've got a thought, but Jesus says, no, go home and tell everyone. Tell anyone who will listen. You go and you tell them. And man, I'm telling you, isn't that sometimes the hardest part? Taking Jesus home with you? It's one thing to experience him in church when everybody wants to be there and the power of God's moving and the tears flow easily, and then you go home and it's hard to bring Jesus home sometimes. It's all right. But I want us to notice Jesus did not task him with teaching Bible studies. Jesus didn't say, I want you to now go and expound the great mysteries of heaven, or I want you to travel around and I want you to lecture on deliverances, the how-tos, what to do and what not to do. He didn't say go rent a hotel and go back in the conference room and charge people for a healing seminar. This man's great commission was to simply go and retell his own story. He said, I just want you to take your own encounter. I want you to take your experience and go and share it. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't make it tricky. You don't have to make it, I mean, if you want to elaborate, that's fine. If you want to say, listen, I should have seen it. Even nature was preparing me, because that night before, I was naked and I was cold in the cemetery, and one of the worst storms I'd ever seen come blowing through. And I don't know what happened, but even in the midst of that terrible storm that rolled through, it stopped in an instant. And I had a storm going on inside of me, and Jesus showed up, and he calmed, because he would have seen it, right? They were out on the storm that night, and Jesus calmed the storm, right? The demoniac, he had been out in it that night too. He would have experienced that same miracle, right? He would have experienced, not knowing what it was, he wouldn't have known the cause of it or why it stopped. And then when he has his own peace inside, one after another, and he was like, all I know is that Jesus brought peace in my life in more than one way. I don't know. He could have preachified it however he wanted to preachify it. But Jesus said, listen, I don't need you to overcomplicate it. I just want you to take your story, and I want you to go and tell as many people as you can. I mean, isn't that part of the reason? Wasn't that the reason for Jesus' final message in Acts 1 when he says, I want you to go and be endued with power from on high. I want you to go and have an encounter. I want you to go and have an experience that you can then go and speak about, that you can then go and talk about. I want you to go. He told them in Acts, he says, go and sit in an upper room until you experience something. Go and get your story and then go and tell somebody about it. And that was it. Folks, I think, again, we don't need to overcomplicate it. Just go and tell your story, and about how when your story intersected and interacted with Jesus' story, what happened. And that's it. And it doesn't have to be much bigger than that. It doesn't have to be much more than that. And that's what that guy did. He went out, and he didn't just in his own hometown. And I think that was part of it. Jesus didn't have a problem. When Jesus was everywhere else and miracles would happen, people flocked to him. But in this particular area, they weren't. And I think, all right, well then here's a place that needs to know. And so he sets that guy loose and says, go spread, go share it. And so I think this is, up to this point, this is somewhat of the picture that Mark has produced for us so far. He said, go ahead. If you want to debate the moral, the ethical, the religious implications of Jesus and what he's doing, then that's fine. But while you guys debate, while the religious leaders debate all of the stuff that's going on, Jesus is just going to go ahead and he's going to keep giving people stories to tell. And that's where we're at in this story. That's where we're at so far in Mark. And so that's where we get to now, verse 21. We were here a couple of Sundays ago, and so I won't linger in this, but this is, Jesus leaves and he goes back across to the other side of the sea. And this is where he's met by a fellow by the name of Jairus, who was a leader, a ruler of the synagogue, verse 22. And it says that when Jairus came and saw him, he too falls at his feet and besought him greatly. This means he begged. I'm sure there were tears. I'm sure there was pleading. I'm sure there was pushing people out of the way. And hey, listen, I'm a ruler of the synagogue. You guys just chill out for a minute. I'm first in line. I think, and greatly he made a big show. My little daughter lies at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her that she can be healed and live. And Jesus went with her. And then as they're traveling, we got the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years. She comes, touches Jesus, the robe, the hem of his garment, and she's made whole. Jesus stops, verse 30. It says, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, he turns around and he says, who touched my clothes? And in a wonderful line, I love this verse. I feel like I identify with this verse. His disciples said, "Are you kidding me? With all of these people around here banging and bumping and touching you, and who touched you?" A little bit incredulous. I think I would have been there. I live, I think, in that verse a little bit, if I'm honest. But Jesus looked around to see her that had done this thing. And the woman, fearing, the Bible says, there's fear again. Remember last week I said there's a lot of fear that seems to live in these stories. The woman, fearing, trembling, knowing what was done in her, she came, fell down before him. And he says unto her, and she tells him everything, and she says, "Daughter, thy faith has made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague." And while he was saying that to her, somebody from the Jairus' house comes and says, "Don't bother him anymore. Your daughter's dead." Jesus hears it, tells the man, "Don't worry, just don't be afraid." There's fear again. Only believe. And then at that point, Jesus makes a shift. He's had the crowd. He sends everybody away but a few of them. And it says, "And he suffered no man to follow him except for Peter, James, and John, and of course, Jairus." He gets to the house of the ruler of the synagogue. He sees all of the chaos, the mourning, and those that are crying and wailing. And in verse 39, he says, "Why are you crying? Why are you making such a big deal about all this? She's not dead. She's just sleeping." And their mourning turned to laughter, not kind we sing about. Their mourning turned to mockery and derision, and they laughed him to scorn. And so he kicks them all out and takes mom and dad into the room, and he goes into where she's at. He takes her by the hand. He tells her to get up. She gets up, gives her some food, and then charges them. Verse 43, here it is again. "Don't let anybody know." Don't tell anybody. The demoniac's good to go, but not you. Let's keep this one under wraps. So let me let's back up to begin. I ran through all that so that I can talk slowly through it. We know where it's going. So as Jesus gets to the other side, and this Jairus comes and falls down at his feet. I think this moment right here is a pretty profound moment. I know that Nicodemus gets a lot of credit for going to Jesus and talking to him, although he goes at night. Jairus goes in the daytime, and Jairus is there with a crowd of people. And so Jairus, being a ruler of the synagogue, undoubtedly had heard some of the conversations about Jesus. I am sure that Jairus knew some of that, because they've already started to make plans about how they're going to kill Jesus. And so he knows that his buddies, he knows that all the people that are in his country club are in opposition to Jesus. And yet he goes and he falls down at the feet of Jesus. Now I want you to just think, I know that sometimes we want to lay peer pressure at the feet of our kids. But can we just talk about the peer pressure in this moment for a moment? Can we just talk about what it's like when you've got a lot of non-believers around you, the kind of boldness that it takes to take a stand for what you believe in, to be willing to put your own neck on the line? So Jairus would have known about all that. He would have known about the tensions between Jesus and the religious elite. And I'll tell you, it would not be hard for me to think, I've watched or maybe has heard Jesus. Think of the stories that we've already had so far where Jesus walked in and says, and he knew their thoughts, and he knew what they were thinking, he knew what they were getting at, and so he would question them and he would challenge them, and he's heard about all of this. And I'm sure there was this moment in him, I'm sure there was this thing inside that would say, there's no way, I can't even go. He's going to know who I'm associated with. He's going to know that I'm one of them, and he's not going to let me in. I wish I won't use specifics because I know that this goes on the internet, but I've had those times before where somebody says, I can't go to church. I cannot walk in those doors because that's where I am. That's where I'm from. I'm from there. That's what I'm if I go in and it comes out, they'll laugh it off. The roof will fall in or whatever. But there's something that happens in people's minds. There's something that happens in our heart that wants to try to keep us away from Jesus. And so I don't doubt that there was a little bit of internal wrestling for him that says, but at some point I think he said, you know what? The worst he can say is no. I know who I might be associated. He might be able to look at me and say, you're one of the ones that's been plotting and scamming against me. Why would I do anything for you? Surely, maybe that's what he's going to do. I don't know. But he knew about the tension that existed between Jesus and his people. But can I say something? When need touches your life, all of the debating and all of the reasoning in the world, it flies out the window. When it's your heart, when it's your life, when it's your baby that's on the line, all of a sudden all of that goes out the window, and we tend to cling to hope over haughtiness. And I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful that Jesus doesn't hold it against us. I'm thankful that Jesus wasn't keeping record of that to say, you know what, and this is why Jesus, we hear it all the time, hey, God's not like Santa Claus. He doesn't keep a list and checking it twice to find out who was naughty and nice. Let me check my list. Nope, you were in the debate about whether or not to kill me or how. Sorry, Jairus, not this time. He didn't have that. It reminds me sometimes Jairus coming out of that environment to go and ask for something from Jesus, the one that he may even have been in some of those dialogues of, yeah, let's get rid of him. If you guys don't like him, I've never met him, but whatever. But it makes me think sometimes of, do you remember when you had kids and you would talk to somebody who hadn't had kids and they had opinions about? Don't you just love it when the unmarried have advice for the married, or when those who don't have kids have advice for those with kids? This is how you do it. This is how you're supposed to train your children, and this is how you're supposed to punish, and this is how you're supposed to. I just love it when people who, it feels like that a little bit, because reality has a way of changing our tune. And Jairus went from a guy who didn't have need to a guy who did have need. And the way that he talked about Jesus before he had need, I'm sure, was different than the way he talked about Jesus when he did have need. See, when having an opinion or having a belief costs me nothing, then I can have big opinions, and I can have brash opinions, and I can have offensive opinions. But when having a belief, it starts to impact my life, well, that's when we truly find out what we believe. Those are the rubber meets the road kind of moments. We've got terms for it. They call it sometimes like prison religion or foxhole religion, or a lot of those kinds of concepts, the idea that your tune changes when need, but that's all right. But again, I can imagine Jairus in this point saying, listen, you boys in the synagogue and you boys in the temple, you can be as cavalier about Jesus as you want to, but when it's your baby who's on a deathbed, then you can come and talk to me about, let's not have this guy around doing the things that he's doing. When it's your family that's on the line, then you can come and let's talk about whether or not to have faith in Jesus. But as of right now, in my need, it resulted in Jairus begging Jesus for a miracle. And so Jesus goes with him. And as they're on their way, we get introduced to this woman with the issue of blood. And we have it's actually considering a lot of the people we know, Verse 25, she had an issue of blood for 12 years, suffered many things from many physicians. That means she had been a guinea pig for 12 years. Had spent all that she had and wasn't any better. In fact, had gotten worse. See, that's a lot of information. But then it goes on. And when she had heard of Jesus, she came in the press behind. She came behind the crowd as they're moving, and she touches his garment. Why did she touch his garment? Because we know that she said to herself, so this is a lot of insight about this woman. This is what I want us to hear. I want us to know there was a demoniac that said, go share your story. And we've got this woman's story. This matters. It means she told somebody. It means she was talking about this. How do you know what she was thinking? How do you know what she said to herself? How do you know where she was standing in the crowd? If they didn't know when it happened, how do they know now to be able to write it down, right? It's because she was talking about it. And so she said to herself, if I can just but touch his clothes, I shall be whole. And when it happened, the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed. We get introduced, we have this extensive background, I think, to this woman, which suggests that, number one, she either continued to follow Jesus or that the disciples followed up with her. I mean, I know that it says that she told him the truth. She said it was me, and she shared some of her story. But for it to get to Mark in this quality and this quantity lets us know that she was around for a while. And it says that after she had heard, where is that at? She had told her, let's see, and when she had heard of Jesus, verse 27, and when she had heard of, hearing always precedes faith. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, right? Paul goes on in Romans, he says, and so how shall they hear without a preacher, and how shall they preach except they be sent? But she heard. She came after she heard. The place of all faith actions comes after hearing. So whether it's a move to repentance, whether it's a move to make a prayer request, it's a move to be baptized, either way, hearing always precedes the faith actions. And then I mentioned this last week, and I'll probably won't be able to linger on this long. I'll draw to a close with this kind of thought. It says that she went about the whole thing the wrong way. She didn't approach Jesus the right way. Others' faith moved them to ask. But she was not moved to ask. Her faith said, just touch and take. I think there's something in the picture of here. Even though her faith said, touch and take, her view of herself, her self-worth, her self-opinion said, hide. And it's weird how there can be both boldness and restriction in the same picture. She said, if I can just she had such great faith, but yet she viewed herself in such a negative capacity that she said, but I've got to hide. How can I hide and still attain? Anybody ever been in that place? You ever been in a church service and you're like, man, I hope the preacher don't look at me. I hope he don't point at me. I hope he doesn't. I just want to sit back here. I just want to hide. I just want to be in my seat. I know I need you, but just let me. I've been there. I've walked in those shoes. I know what that's like, but her faith in Jesus was hidden with self-doubt. Charles Spurgeon, and how does this make you feel? Listen to how he talks this. How does this make you feel? Charles Spurgeon says it like this: the woman was very ignorant. She imagined that virtue came out of Christ by the law of necessity, without his knowledge or without his direct will. Moreover, she was a stranger to the generosity of Jesus' character, or she would have not gone behind to steal the cure which he was already ready to bestow. She had to come in behind. Misery should always place itself right in the face of mercy. Had she known the love of Jesus' heart, she would have said, I have but to put myself where he can see me, and his omniscience will teach him my case, and his love at once will work my cure. And we admire her faith, but we marvel at her ignorance. After she obtained the cure, she rejoiced with trembling. Glad was she that the divine virtue had wrought a marvel in her, but she feared, and he lays this on her, which we will talk about later. She feared lest Christ should retract the blessing and put a negative upon the grant of his grace. Little did she comprehend the fullness of his love. How do we feel about the idea that she was ignorant and she did it the wrong way? Because of her blood issue, she was unclean. But if she's going to fully embrace that concept, everybody that she touched in the crowd, she was making unclean. So it doesn't matter if she's in the front of the crowd or the back of the crowd, the side. Anybody she's touching, she's making unclean. So if that was a concern, it would have kept her from the crowd itself, I think. Say that again? Yeah. Yeah. She gave hope to those that were thinking the same thing, experiencing the same thing. Yeah, desperation drove her past the fear of it all. But how do we feel about her doing it the wrong way? Sister Haynes? Good. Okay, thank you. But here's the deal though. I know but this is the important part. He throws this out there because it's an existing opinion. And this is an existing opinion from a learned individual. And if you don't think that that's the kind of opinion that doesn't float around sometimes in the house about that's not how you do it, right? Wait, aren't you supposed to go to the altar? You can't be, or don't you have to be in the church? You can't do it in your house, right? You can't have that prayer meeting in your house. You can't. I mean, am I wrong sometimes? And we're like, hey, that's not how you worship. That's not how you praise. That's not. You're supposed to laugh. You're not supposed to cry. You're supposed to cry. You're not supposed to laugh. Very true. She was definitely viewed differently than everybody else. Her station without the plague was different. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? Absolutely. And I think the other part that I think needs to be said is nowhere in here do we have a thing that says this is how you're supposed to do it. We sometimes will look at the majority and think that's what it's supposed to be. But there's nothing that says, in fact, we have other instances that we'll get to eventually where Jesus doesn't even go. Jesus isn't even around the person that gets healed. And so I think the reason I linger here is because I want it to be, number one, I want it to be a part of our thinking, and I want it to be a part of, even if we ever hear anything like this, and so there's no right or wrong way for you to get to Jesus. And if it is for you, if it is, and we know we've had those times where a person, it is a deep intercessory wailing cry of mourning, and other times it is a silent meditation. And listen, it's okay. Because I think the truth is when we come to God, we all come to God ignorant. I think we all come, at that point when we come to the Lord, whether it was in our youth or whether it's later in life, all we have is what people have handed us. And we say, these are some pieces and I don't know how they fit, but this is what they're telling me to do, and so that's what I'm going to try. And we all come ignorant. But Sister Karen said it best last week, that it's the honesty aspect of it that carries the greatest weight. Any honest actions towards the Lord, any honest expression of faith towards, I believe God honors. He doesn't say, well, I appreciate it, but that was the wrong color. You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine doing that to a little kid where they come and they color it in and their sky's purple and the sun is blue and you know, the trees are all yellow and pink, and they're like, oh, that's good, you stayed in the lines, but those are all the wrong colors. When we come and we hand Jesus what we hand him, he's not, got out of the lines over here. Well, yeah, that's why I'm here. My life's out of the lines, okay? But he's not, you didn't come the right way. You took 5 too many steps from your seat to the altar. You should have done it in 6 instead of 12, you know, or whatever. The other thing that stands out about this woman, and I'll try to draw this to a close. This is the first woman, this is the first person to receive from Jesus without asking. Not only did she come from behind, but she didn't ask. She just took. She bypassed the tradition or the custom of getting his attention and then asking for somehow she just received. You know why I think this kind of a story is so important? Because remember, Mark's writing to people long after Jesus has ascended. And so far, all of their interactions, it's like, well, yeah, he calmed the storm, but Jesus was in the boat. And he delivered the demon-possessed, but Jesus was right there in front of him. And even healing this little girl, Jesus was going to where she was at. This is all great, and that's all awesome about the power of who he was while he was there, but guess who's not around anymore? And all of a sudden, just in the telling of the story, people start to put pieces together to say, this is how you're supposed to get something from Jesus. And this is how things are supposed. You got to touch him. You got to be able to be present, to be touched by him. He's got to be able to speak to you. And here is somebody who didn't. And all of a sudden, whatever kind of picture or whatever kind of order and organization they were trying to put to their new walk with God, it just shattered and said, no. You thought that you had him figured out, and then this comes along. So you don't have to talk face to face with him. He works. God works in different ways here. And again, I think part of this is Mark is expanding their brains to say, we need to know Jesus as bigger, right? Not just who he could touch and who he could talk to. He's bigger than that. He's bigger than that. Stand with me. Please. And we'll pick up here at verse 30 next week. Wonderful stories, wonderful examples. Both of these accounts so far are outsiders. I think it's, and I've talked before, I'll probably talk more about it again, how Jairus would have felt to be delayed by somebody like this. Jairus, who would have been, positionally deems preference and favor and first dibs type of deal, had to take a back seat to a 12-year plague, had to take a back seat to this kind of, and both of these last two stories we have are people that were completely outcasts of society. I mean, as far outsiders as you can get, because again, not just the plague, but even as a woman in that day and age, not having a place, so you're out, right? The lepers, the demoniac, this woman. I mean, when we talk about getting outside, what is the message then that Mark is saying? What's this saying? Is you can't, I don't care how far you think you are away. I don't care how bad you think things are. Jesus not only can do it, but he'll take time. We can, because we can think, oh, they're better than me. They deserve. God's dealing. He's not, why bother him with this? He's got Jairus. He always made time. Yeah. He's an accessible God. He's an accessible Jesus. And so far, we have not found somebody that is too far for him to touch, or too far gone for him to love. And in fact, even in the last story, those that rejected him, he still sent a missionary to them. He said, okay, if you don't want it from me, that's fine. You can take it from him. He still sent a missionary. And so, Lord, I love you, and I thank you for your love, and I thank you for these examples of just how far and how deep and how wide is your love for us. I thank you, Lord God, that I think these are bigger than just pictures of healing and the things that you can do, Lord, but this is so much more that speaks to who we are and where we are as a people, and lets us know that it's not so much about, God, what you can do, but who you want to interact with. And I pray that you would help us to lean into that, God, and to know that you are more concerned with the who than you are with the what. And so I just pray, God, that as we leave this place, let that resonate, and let that settle in our heart and in our spirit, God, and help us to be good examples, help us to be good witnesses, have a good testimony of the things that you've done in our lives. Keep us healthy, Lord, I pray. Keep us safe, and bring us back at the next appointed time according to your will and purpose. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. God bless you. You are dismissed in the fear of God.